Welcome to everyone joining. We're going to give everyone a couple of minutes before we get started. See a lot of people still trickling in. Okay. Good afternoon and good morning to those of you on the West Coast. Welcome to today's webinar presented by Bracklet entitled ESG, Don't Check Boxes, Make Progress. First and foremost, we'd like to wish everyone a happy Veterans Day to all those who have served. On behalf of the Bracklet team and our panel, we thank you for your service. Now, a couple of quick housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded for those unable to attend. All registered attendees will receive a copy of the webinar shortly after it concludes. Also, the chat functionality in the webinar is open. We'd love for you all to introduce yourselves and tell us where you're logging on from. We also encourage you to post any questions for the panelists here or in the Q&A box. Property managers serve on the front lines of tenant relations and service, building operations and maintenance, while also reporting and taking action on ESG. My name is Decker Stanley, Director of Sales at Bracklet, and today I'm joined by three of our fantastic property managers. Carrie Horvath, General Manager, Asset Services at Cushman & Wakefield. Linda Malone, Senior General Manager, Property Operations at Midway. And Jess Moore, Senior Property Manager at Stream Realty. We're excited to have you all with us today and looking forward to a great conversation. To get things started, we'd love to hear about your day-to-day responsibilities as they relate to tenant experience, building operations, and ESG reporting, both for owners and for tenants. Carrie, let's start with you.
Great, thank you so much for including me in this. I'm super happy to be here. Overall, day-to-day is, in a nutshell, keeping our tenants and our team supported, feeling like they're supported. So what really is involved with that is communication. Obviously, in this day and age, things are quite different than they were this time last year or even in January with COVID and all the things happening in our world. So it's really shifted a lot of our focus, finding new and creative ways to engage with our tenants, most of whom are not working in the office. On a typical day, we'd have about 1,700 tenants walking through our building, and we're down to maybe 100, 150 a day on a busy day. So it shifted how we have touch points with our tenants. And then also how we're engaging with our staff. We're very fortunate here at 271 17th Street where we have a very supportive client, so we were able to keep all of our staff on site, but we also need to keep them busy. So we've been creative with our other managers in the Atlanta area, finding additional work to keep them busy. And then really focusing on operating expenses and building operations. So we're spending a lot of time really analyzing what it looked like in this world, air filtration, tongue-tied today, air filtration, how our building is efficient in a COVID environment. So we're spending a lot of time analyzing that with engineering. So it's a new world and it's been quite interesting.
It really is, it really is. Linda, how about you?
Thank you, Decker. And I also want to second happy Veterans Day and thank you for anyone who may be on here as a veteran that served. We really appreciate your service. I'm honored to be part of the team today. So the assets that my team currently manages are landmarks in Houston, and they were built in the early 1900s. So they were built by Jesse Jones, who is also known as Mr. Houston, and was very influential in the Houston area and also in our national government. So one of our buildings is listed as on the National Register of Historic Places. So we always seem to come up with the most unique situations that maybe aren't typical for newer age buildings or even buildings built in the 60s or 70s. You know, we have very just unique circumstances. However, taking that into account, our goal is to embrace the historic nature of our building and meld with modern amenities. We, along with ESG initiatives like LEED, Energy Star, Fitwell, we're always trying to keep competitive in the CBD that we're in. And we're also always looking for cost efficiencies like Carrie mentioned.
Awesome. And last but not least, Jess.
Hey guys, thanks for having me here this afternoon. Hope everybody's having a good day. I am a senior property manager for Stream Realty. I manage 5 buildings all across Atlanta, including one that I've taken over the last 5 years from non-LEED certified to LEED Silver to LEED Gold and Energy Star certified. We also won an International Toby Award in 2019. The main cornerstone of my management style is adding value across all levels of the building, including the tenant experience, the operations, and of course, ownership. I strongly believe that the best way to accomplish that is through ESG and high performance initiatives, and that creating a close building community where everybody works together, tenants, ownership, and operations.
Fantastic. Thank you all for that intro. So we'd like to dive a little bit deeper and hear about some of the pain points you're facing. Let's start with utility bills, which we all know can have their challenges. Will you talk a little bit about your current processes as it relates to utility bills? And Carrie, we can start with you again.
Sure. Utility bills, coming directly into the property are pretty streamlined. One electrical, one chilled water, and one domestic water. But where it becomes very labor intensive and time consuming is when you get down into breaking out the specific tenant components around electricity specifically. And now we're finding with some of our tenant build outs where we're submetering water as well. So it's an incredibly manual process for us where we have, each tenant has submeters within their suite for varying types of equipment and needs. We're manually reading those, our engineering staff is. We're vetting to make sure the reads are accurate. Then we've got to calculate the bills, generate manual invoicing, troubleshoot meters that aren't working. So it's an incredibly manual process. And then how that ties into logging that through Energy Star to make sure that we're actually providing accurate data that generates really relevant information for scoring. So it's a pain point, it's a challenge. And again, kind of back to COVID world, and as things change, we have a few tenant build outs that are going on right now. We're finding tenants don't want to use common restrooms anymore. So they're building out, unisex stalls inside their suites, or their, different needs for water. So it's just shifting a little bit how we're handling things internally, but it's a very, very time intensive process with a lot of room for error if you're not really paying attention.
Yeah, wow. Linda, what about you? I think you're muted.
I hate it when that happens. So we work with energy brokers who monitor rates and contract opportunities, but ultimately we are still involved, like Carrie said, in the data collection for the building infrastructure systems. We have to interpret the data day to day, month to month, year over year. We have to make decisions relating to that data. We have to make budgeting and long-term capital planning. With COVID, as Carrie mentioned, occupancy load adjustments. We can't run the buildings the same as we did, when we had a full occupancy. So, reporting and collection, as we all know, is subject to human error. So we can have, transposing numbers or missing numbers, or and combine that with technological errors such as faulty sensors and meters. It can be combined to be very, there's a lot of error prone of capability through that. And then, we have all levels of our PM team are involved. So it touches so many different levels, so many different people, so many different systems that, the reporting and the collection are very much, error prone for us.
Yeah, well, we'll touch on some of those opportunities to improve efficiency and hopefully reduce time for you. But Jess, before we move on, tell us a bit more about your processes related to.
I definitely
buildings.
agree
Go
with
ahead.
everything that Linda and Carrie said. And, we have a very unique tenant base in our building. We house most of the Atlanta radio stations. We have a lot of 24-hour tenants. We have tons of sub-metering. We have a tenant that has their own chiller. So it is very labor intensive to reconcile those utility bills and where they need to go and who's using what, and what kind of energy loads are most efficient and who needs to be paying for and getting all that data.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we've got a couple of poll questions that we're going to launch to the audience, but I'd also like to pose this first one to you all, and that is, how much time would you say in hours per month you and or someone from your team spends dealing with utility bills? Carrie, fire away if you're ready.
Yeah, I would say for our group, we're anywhere from 3, 4, 5 hours a week, or a month working on that, if not more, when you take into consideration the manual reads of the meters and in calculating the bills. And as our buildings age and tenants who've been placed for a long time, making sure the accuracy of those sub meters. So it's quite a bit of time.
I would agree. I would say it's 2 to 4 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. Especially if you factor in, like you said, engineering, reading all the sub meters and reconciling all the billing.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of time, a lot of time. Well, again, we're going to talk a little bit more about that in terms of where we can hopefully drive some efficiencies, but want to talk a little bit more specifically around ESG reporting. There's a growing focus and to some extent mounting pressure on property teams to report on ESG initiatives, both for the sake of your tenants as well as to ownership and their partners. What metrics are you most focused on, and to whom and how are you reporting it? I know that's a lot to unpack there, but Carrie?
Good. I always get to start, right? It's so much fun. Quite a few different ways. Obviously, I think, Energy Star is something that pretty much all of us are familiar with and log that information. So we're doing that. Our property is LEED Gold certified. We are in the middle of certification period. So our actual reporting time commitment is not that much, but obviously we've got to maintain historical records so that when it is time to file all of this, we have it. So we're in the process of applying for Fitwell certification. So, that's a lot of information that's being compiled, significant amount of time. And then really, from a reporting standpoint, using Bracklet, we, through our ownership and our ownership sustainability partner, we provide a lot of information that's pulled from all of these different areas to report quarterly to our ownership how we're doing, and also use that information for projects, which we'll talk about a little bit. But I think from a challenge, all of them, with the exception of a couple, are very manual processes, and then we've got a lot of hands touching that information with different levels of interpretation of that information, so that can create some confusion and time to the process.
We'll shift over to Jess this time, mix it up.
Yeah, we also are reporting to Energy Star and LEED. We hope to start Fitwell certification maybe next year or the year after, depending on how things go with COVID. The initial setup of those programs was very labor intensive. Like Carrie said, once you get set up and you start historically reporting the data, it's a little less, but you still, it's a very manual process to accurately make sure that everything's being reported and recorded correctly, because you can lose your certification really easily. Anything changes, and a couple years ago, when Energy Star changed all of their metrics and everyone's scores plummeted, it creates a big difference in having all those historical records, and being able to accurately look back and analyze all the data can make a huge difference in seeing what you need to do and where you need to go to earn back those certifications.
I'll jump on that and say, we are doing Energy Star lead, and fit well. And in all three of those, as we've mentioned, the detail that you need to provide in submission with your applications involves a lot of time. Some of them involve creating procedures and SOPs that possibly you haven't documented before, but are second nature to your team. So creating those and then reviewing those, and without templates, it makes it very difficult. So we've talked about coming up with those and then reviewing them. But as Jess mentioned, when standards or qualifications or certifications change, then you also have to spend additional time analyzing what you've already submitted, what you have, and then what you need to make up the difference now.
Yeah, well, also some inefficiencies in that process, it sounds like. And just related to that, and we'll launch our second and final poll question. So which ESG bodies or certifications are you currently pursuing, or do you plan to pursue in the future? I know most of you have mentioned which ones you're facing. And so I'll just jump to this next question. And thinking about those bodies and the certification process, and Jess, specifically, you mentioned that it was a heavy lift up front and then certainly ongoing effort. But in thinking about the ongoing effort, and maybe we'll focus specifically on Energy Star, what would you say the time commitment and effort commitment from you and or your team is to deal with just the Energy Star side of things?
Making sure that everything is properly recorded. I mean, I would say that probably adds, an extra hour or two a month just to make sure that Energy Star has all the bills they need. They don't just collect your electricity login. They monitor your water, your trash usage, all of those things. What you're buying, as far as cleaning supplies and things like that. So it's a lot to handle, make sure that they have access to all that information. I feel like there definitely could be ways that could be streamlined and that process could be done easier. It's very manual right now.
Well, and right now, just to jump in on that as it relates to Energy Star, and I know we keep going back to COVID world, but as occupancy fluctuations happen and tenant use, staying on top of managing how that's set up on the back end, because if it's not set up correctly or accurately, then your score obviously can be negatively impacted by that. So it's important to stay on that and appropriately and accurately document it. But a lot of it's subjective unless you've got a tracker of who's in the building and what floors. It can make it very challenging.
Yeah, that makes sense. Understood. I want to remind the audience that we'd love to hear your questions. If you all have any questions, drop them in the Q&A box or in the chat box, and our team will let us know, and hopefully we can answer them. But I do want to shift the focus a little bit and talk about what we can do to improve or drive efficiencies in this process. And so first question is, what resources do you use to drive discussions with your asset managers or ownership and or their partners with respect to ESG reporting and budget recommendations?
So start with that one. Carrie, you don't have to go first.
Okay, thank you.
So, I think it's really important that, as property managers, we are continually educating ourselves or researching the market. We're the eyes and the ears on the ground, so to speak. And, we are so familiar with the assets that we manage, we can combine the two to get the most effective efficiencies and programs. What projects can the building participate in that are going to reduce energy consumption or operating expenses or help us to become more sustainable. Current hot topics, paying attention, are MERV 13 filters or UV lighting or outside air transition rates and bipolar ionization. So for all of those, how they affect each of your buildings is different. Like I mentioned, my building being historic and very aged, we do not have a standardized system throughout the building. We have multiple different types of air handling units throughout the entire building. So what works in one area may not work in another area. So by educating and investigating, in the market and research, you can prepare yourself for that. We use third-party sustainability consultants. We use, and also industry. We rely on our industry, like Carrie and Jess, we rely on our industry cohorts and our professional organizations that help us and kind of gather information from across, nationally and locally for it.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's something that we've been having a lot of conversations with our property teams about, certainly with COVID operations and the need to balance energy consumption with keeping the building clean and safe for tenants to return to. And so talking about bipolar ionization and filtration strategies and UV lighting, those are certainly conversations I think that all building teams and their ownership groups are having. Just curious to know from your perspective, I mean, you mentioned having a unique tenancy with all of the radio stations and 24-hour operations. What kinds of things are you doing or talking about with respect to keeping that environment safe, knowing that those stations have to operate and they have to operate there? It's not like they can work from home. So what types of things are you leveraging, or strategies are you deploying now or in the near future to help weigh those two important components?
We've done all the standard things to keep our building safe, adding hand sanitizing stations and upgrading filters, round the clock cleaning, enforcing mask wearing, all the standard CDC guidelines. But one of, when you talk about like analyzing the data and what's coming back with that, one of the things that we're doing right now during this time, during this lower occupancy, we do still have occupancy, but lower occupancy was, like Linda said, we did take advantage of doing some of these bigger projects that maybe we've been holding off on. We could do them during business hours and get things done. And when we're doing that, and combined with COVID and the lower occupancy and everybody saving electrical usage right now because they're not running their buildings as much, or they're running on lower schedules and things like that, it's hard to tell without a third party analyzing that data for us, without somebody like Bracklet looking at it. What is saving me my money? Is it this project that I did in February, where I put VFDs on my water pumps? Or is it, because we have lower occupancy, and being able to, like Carrie mentioned, really track and know who's in your building and what's going on, and then use that with the project list. You can really see and narrow in, so you get a good idea of what you're actually saving and what you're actually doing for your building. It was really complicated this year with everything that was going on, so it was great to have somebody that could analyze that data for us.
I would agree. We went through a similar process, specifically around, outside air, indoor air quality and filtration. So adding the filters, and based on CDC recommendations and ASHRAE standards, how are we performing? And it's great to say, okay, we're, bringing in the max that our system will allow, but is that relevant to the standards that are in play now in our occupancy? So having that data come back from Bracklet in real time to say, okay, at your occupancy of less than 300 people, you're performing at 300% to the ASHRAE standard. And as your occupancy goes up, you need to adjust your, the flushing of your air, recirculation to this level to continue to maintain that standard. And at some point you're going to peak out. So what do you do? And that's what we're working through when we come back to 100% occupancy. What does that look like in our environment? So to be able to directly compare to how your building and system is performing versus just here's a stat what I'm paying in my power bill doesn't directly tie to how I'm daily operating my building. So there's a big shift in usefulness of information from what you're putting in Energy Star to what value you're getting out of a service such as Bracklet that is monitoring your building daily. And we also at the end of last year into this year, and it just coincided with COVID, but upgraded our BAS system to better account for the adjustments we needed to make, because we knew we needed some additional programming to be more efficient. And so we were able to do that, and now we're better able to manage what's happening in today's world. So it was a great benefit, and glad that it happened at the time that it did. So.
Nice. Yeah, and it seems to make sense and almost be a no-brainer that the sooner you do something that saves energy and saves money, the better, the more time you have to enjoy it. But you also have to weigh that, of course, with budget considerations and what's possible and when it's possible. But with that in mind, what steps can you take to improve building performance sooner rather than later, so that you can maximize those energy and cost savings?
And I think every building owner is going to be different, obviously, on what their abilities are financially or otherwise. So you've got to work through that. But there's, a lot of programs and vendors out there that candidly are looking for some additional business at this time. And I actually met with a group on Monday for lighting retrofits and really being creative and thinking outside of the box of how you get that engagement. With your tenant base too. Like at our property, about 2/3 of the building are full floor tenants. So they're responsible for their suite. There's only so much we have control over, but so how do you generate the excitement or energy within that tenant to contribute overall to savings? So, and I know Linda and Jess have ideas too, or things that they've implemented, but it's, is working with them on getting them spurred into being a part of the process and providing accurate data. I mean, we can pull data now by floor to say, here, if this floor changed out these fixtures, here's what the ROI would be. And so is that a partnership between the tenant and the ownership? That's where you get to be creative.
I would jump in and say yes for all of that. The reporting that we're able to obtain, we through Bracklet in the meters that we have in information, when we have made decisions to, increase the cold deck on a vacant floor or, reduce the hours of operation that Jess mentioned, and we can look and quantify that. It's when you don't have those reports able to pull, you're looking at an overall electrical bill and you're trying to analyze and compare. But when you can get down to kind of the technical nuts and bolts and you can link one to the other, then it really helps you to be able to provide a story and a narrative.
Yeah, I agree. I think, owners are very focused on payback, how, yeah, this is great, but when is it going to be, how much is it going to save me? And is it really going to pay for itself? And the analyzing tools that we can use to show that and show how much we're saving really does help overall. And then to piggyback off of what Carrie said, getting people to buy in, because it takes, not just the owners buying in with payback, it takes the tenants buying in and understanding why we're recycling, why it's important, why we're saving electricity. One of our creative ideas was to drill in per floor and show tenants and make it a competition between tenant floors of who is saving the most energy month to month and what they're doing. Broadcasting that in the lobby and making it fun. It just gets people involved. And I feel like sustainability is just best served when everyone's involved with a.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think people love a good competition and it encourages action, really. I mean, especially if it's visible. I mean, when you make it where you're kind of ranking people and they see that they can actively make a difference and that their actions are actually improving things is certainly helpful for sure. With respect to sustainability and what other things, and Carrie, we can start with you on this one, but what other things can we do to make sustainability part of the daily conversation? And if not daily, something that's on a more continual basis. I feel like maybe it only comes up, when the bills come in or when there's a meeting specific to it, but it may not always be something that's front and center for everyone. What strategies or ideas do you have around making it a little bit more integrated into the day-to-day, activity and operations?
A lot of it is, again, owner-driven. Your building owner-driven, but also your tenant base. Here we've been, and it's, we had a very active, we were doing lunch and learns on a monthly basis and in contests with our tenants around sustainability initiatives and sustainability surveys with our tenants and putting a lot of education out there right as we implemented the upgrade to our BAS system, which has given us a lot more functionality and control over what's happening. We're now getting in and we're going to start pushing out some more ideas to our tenants to see about buy-in, but it's a weird time to be answering that question just because we don't have the number of people in here, but we do also have a high where our property used to be predominantly attorneys and bankers. That demographic is shifting more to a lot of our tech firms. Atlantic Station is becoming a tech hub in the Atlanta Midtown market. Square's payment processor, Calendly, Live Nation, some others that are here. So their focus already is integrated into their organization. So that buy-in's been easier for us. And these build-outs are happening already with significant sustainability measures in play. So it's going back to our existing tenant base who's been here for 11 years and saying, how do we shift some of that mindset? So, within my on-site team, we're working through what does that look like now? Let's get prepared. So when hopefully the doors fully open back up after the first of the year, that seems to be when people are wanting to come back at this point, we can get that going. But we did pretty much monthly lunch and learns and communications about sustainability.
So we are fortunate that this kind of aligns right in line with our Kingsley survey that we do annually. So we were able to incorporate questions regarding ESG initiatives into our Kingsley survey to get, honest feedback from our customers and our clients. So I think using that, the responses and resources and making decisions based on that, as Carrie mentioned, in-person visits are much harder, and maybe the contests or the other items that we might have done, tenant events or other draws that we could bring to the property, are a little more inhibited right now because of the low occupancy, and the majority of our customers just aren't here. So we're fortunate in that they have the ability to sustain their business model in the interim from home, but we also know that they do need to come back into the office. So to be prepared for them coming back and looking at all of the adjustments that we made during COVID, are these ones that we want to extend post-COVID? Do we want to see, is there an in-between that we can arrive at that makes it acceptable for the customer as well as, the ownership? So, instead of going all the way back to where we were pre-COVID, is there a balance now that we can achieve between the two?
Yeah, and it's an interesting thought. And Jess, I would throw this one out to you. And just thinking about your day to day and your job, and you mentioned you're managing a few different buildings, but what things do you anticipate going back to normal, if I can say that, versus things that are going to be permanent changes based on what we've all been through this year and what buildings are facing with respect to having tenants come back to work?
I think that the social distancing is going to last for a while. I don't think you're going to see crowded 15 people slammed in an elevator for a long time to come. So I think that is definitely going to last. And I also think that you're going to have a different schedule with energy in a building schedule. People aren't going to maybe just be there 8 to 5. They're going to want to have different shifts to have people there so they can spread out. So your operations of the building might start to look a little different as people come back, so that they can, maybe some people, work until 2, and then some people come in and work later. It just, I think that there's going to be a hybrid for a while before everything comes, fully back. And I think that we need to be prepared for that and ready for that. And, ready to operate our buildings safely to accommodate and make people, feel good about coming back. Because if they don't feel good about being here, then, they're not gonna come, and people aren't gonna rent offices,
Well, I would say in addition to that, with the change of potential hours or shift, rotations, the ability to pull reports on those and find out if there's different areas or different air handler units, or if there's different ways that you can continue to modify and monitor your usage, you can still, instead of doubling your costs because now there's a 12-hour workday or a 16-hour workday, you can gain efficiencies by pulling those detailed reports and then quantifying what works, what doesn't work, and then how that can work. I think those are going to be really helpful moving forward to educate, or to make educated decisions on that, operational decisions.
Agreed. And having, for those buildings that have a robust or significant BAS, where if you're in partnership with your tenant, okay, hey, it's during this part of the day, this side of the floor is what's being used. You regulate air and lighting to that degree to try to balance it out. But it is interesting because this isn't always resulting in cost savings or efficiency right now. But, obviously the IAQ has got to be the focus right now, and comfort level, tenant comfort level, because we do want them coming back. We want everybody back.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, I think that raises, another interesting question in that, there's more resources available, there's technologies and tools and a lot of more data available to you in a lot of ways, but how can you really, leverage that data to make decisions and make the right decisions and be confident that, you're recommending the right things to ownership in terms of what needs to be done at the building. And so, I suppose the question is, what do you see now that is really innovative in helping you drive those conversations? And second to that, if you could wave a magic wand and have anything that you wanted to make your life easier in that respect, what would it be, or what would some of your ideas be to improve the process, whether it exists today or not?
So I'll jump on that first. I think we've all talked about, having templates, having, documents that can be boilerplate, essentially, so we can modify them per building, but ultimately the bulk of the information is already there. There are so many advances in the third-party resources and technology that software we're able to use, and the systems that we can review the data and eliminate some of the errors or potential errors through those systems. But building onto those systems is, if I could wave a magic wand, I would want those systems to kind of be smart systems in the sense of a smartphone, like learn different floors, different areas, and then they communicate that back to me. So I'm not having to think about, this floor works, really early, or this floor works, they are traders with overseas markets. So they, work at 2 a.m. in the morning. And so getting systems that kind of become smart systems, and not just quantifying or logging the data for you and producing reports, but growing into a smart mode or a manner, I think would be really helpful.
Yeah, I love that. If I could wave a magic wand, and I've talked to several access control companies, so I don't believe this exists. Maybe it does somewhere, but if, your BAS could work with your access control system. So when people are fobbing into a floor, it can adjust the load if if you have more than X amount of people coming onto that floor to work, like you said, at 2 a.m. Maybe they're all coming in to do a big project, and then it knows when they leave and it self-adjusts. That would be amazing.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. It's the manual manipulation and just kind of understanding and guessing and, trying to stay on top of what's happening with your tenant base and the needs of the building, because it adjusts daily. Outside temperatures impact, weather and patterns, all of that plays a factor into what you need to do in your building to be efficient. So yeah, if there was some way that all of those things talk together and it just self-adjusted, that would be great. But what I do appreciate about the technology that we do have is, the ability to look at it by floor. And, obviously, Linda, I think you already touched on it, is that, air filters. Do you do 13, 14, 15? What does that look like based on your building and your system? So, getting that analysis back based on the specific equipment we have with the specific rates that we need, what is truly going to be the best filter for our property, and what's the ROI on that, because again, some decisions are driven off of, finances, but, we want to meet at a minimum, the minimum requirements of the CDC. So just having that at your fingertips and a consultant to help you with that, maneuver is invaluable, absolutely invaluable.
Yeah, I think that makes a great point. It's always helpful to have a second set of eyes or another opinion on things from experts or those who've been through things before. Although this is very unique circumstances, and our team earlier this year poured over research in terms of indoor air quality, and we actually released a white paper on it that was pretty comprehensive. But one of the things that we've been having a lot of conversations with our property teams about is, specifically filtration strategies. And we know that, the higher the MERV rating, the better generally in terms of eliminating virus or removing virus, but at what cost? And what does that mean for my systems in terms of pushing air through a more denser filter? Is that going to cost more in terms of energy? And so, we found some newer technology filters that may be more expensive, but they're more effective. They can be washed. They can last much, much longer than the ones that have to be thrown away and replaced. And so, what does that analysis look like in terms of being able to weigh the more expensive cost versus its ability to be reused and last longer? And what does that mean for my pressure and the toll it's taking on energy? Is that negligible, or is it going to be something that we need to really understand? And so, it's certainly a unique situation that we found ourselves in. And so uncovering that data first and foremost, and then making sense of it, I think is really what we've all landed on, is let's really understand it. And that way we can make the best situations and quantify them where possible.
Well, and I'll just, one more thing, if you don't mind me jumping in. One of the reports too that we've recently received again is about filtration and how much outside air we're bringing in related to requirements and things like that. And to have a report and a graph right at my fingertips that I can send to a tenant, that screenshot to say, here's our building occupancy, and here in bright green is that we are performing at 300% to the standard. Now, as our occupancy goes up, here's what it looks like, and here's how we're going to adjust, because many of our contacts here at the property level have to report to higher compliance within their organization. So to be able to have that and say, here, we are doing it. We have done the research. Here's the validation of what we are doing through real-time reporting and how it's being adjusted regularly. It makes it a no-brainer here. Super easy.
Yeah, I'd say that it's one thing to make the effort. It's another thing to be able to prove it and to report out on it, not just to make your tenants feel better, but I would imagine ownership and their partners would also be very interested to know what steps you're taking to attract new tenants, to keep the ones that you have, especially in this environment that's most certainly going to become more and more competitive for space. I think being able to prove the steps you're taking is going to be super impactful. So appreciate all that commentary. I do have a couple of audience questions coming in. Before we jump to those, any final thoughts in terms of indoor air quality or anything we've talked about? We can certainly circle back to it, but just wanted to tie off on that subject before we jump over to audience Q&A.
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. So one of the first questions that came in, what are folks doing relative to outside air in buildings that don't have the ability to bring in more than a fixed amount, sometimes as low as 32%?
This question came up at our property, so I'll jump on it. 32% of what? So that was the big question. Where is it? No building, at least what has been shared with me and through all the stuff that we've had to do, no building can bring in 100% air. It's 100% of your system's ability to bring in air. And what does that look like? So that measurement that I was just talking about with our property, because it's, oh my gosh, we're only bringing in 15% or 20%. That's of our system's ability to bring it in. But we are exceeding ASHRAE standards by 300% at that rate. So it's getting to the detail of what the question is and understanding your system. So I think your HVAC vendor should be able to assist with those calculations, or your engineer, but I guess that would be my way of touching on that question. I don't know if anybody else has comment.
Yeah, Jess, I know you have a bit of a engineering, not necessarily background, but you're pretty well versed in systems and how they operate, just with your experience and us working with you. But would be curious to hear your thoughts on that topic or related as it pertains.
Yeah,
to
I would
systems.
just definitely piggyback off of what Carrie said. You have to really, drill down what the question is. Is it your system that's failing you, or could it be something as easy as adding a VFD on your air handlers so that you can get more outside air in and make your systems more efficient. That's a really pretty low cost, low hanging fruit thing that you can do. And you could even do it, divide up your floors and do certain floors, the tenants that are coming back faster than other ones. And I think that just different ways that you can make that system. Maybe it doesn't work that way right now, but you can make it more efficient so that it does.
Yeah, good answers. And so kind of to piggyback on that, and we're sticking on the topic of indoor air quality, but what is the panel's opinion on UVC and bipolar ionization? And has anyone put in a UVC or BP system in a whole building or in any other space?
So we have investigated UVC lighting. We have investigated air purifiers or air sanitization systems. And so we've looked at them for elevators, we've looked at them for vestibules, we've looked at them for common area floors. And so what we've found is that, depending upon the age of your building and the capabilities of your building, you have to modify for that. Some buildings, in ours in particular, given the equipment that we have, MERV 13 filters, a 2-inch filter doesn't work for us. We would have to go to a 4-inch filter, and then we still could be straining our systems and causing more damage than good. But we could potentially add a UVC light onto the supply side of our air handler units, which would then treat the air that's going out to the floor. So, maybe we can't do one, but we can do another. So I think you have to look at your building systems, and you have to, maybe bipolar ionization is going to be more effective for what you have. If you have, I know, for instance, when we get a special request for cleaning and they want us to do furniture or seating areas, the topical treatment that they would typically spray on a desktop or on a phone or wipe down with doesn't really work in that situation. So if you're looking, if the majority of the areas are conferencing centers and they have soft surfaces such as fabric walls or fabric everywhere that you want to treat or sanitize, you have to think about the different options available. And so you can treat the air that's going out on the floor one way, and then you can treat the surfaces with the other. So I think you could do a combination, but you really just have to look into what your building is capable of doing, or what your operations staff is capable of helping out with.
Mm-hmm. At my property at 271, our systems were able to handle and meet all the requirements without going to that level. So we generally investigated it, but it would be unnecessary spend for what our building was able to handle at this point in time. As occupancy increases and we get back, we may be revisiting that topic based on the load of the building. But at this point, we just haven't had to go that route, unfortunately.
I just think it's important to remember with the UV, I think they're great. I think it's a great option for things, but what you're really doing is you're keeping the filter cleaner longer. The air moves too fast. You're not really like zapping the air with electric lighting.
Yeah.
That's not, you're keeping the filter and the equipment cleaner longer. It's treating that. And I think that's, kind of an important distinction, and you just really need to do your research about, what you're buying and what you're getting and who you're getting it from. It can be a great tool, and I think they're wonderful. But there's a lot of research, and it's a lot of new technology right now, especially with everything going on.
I would also just add, make sure that if you do look at UV lighting in general, educate yourself on the difference between UVA, UVB, and UVC. So UVA and B lights, they will inhibit organic growth, but they will not necessarily affect the micron size of a virus. So it depends on, what your goal is. And so just, there's a lot of resources out there on UV lighting. So I know this question, I think, was specifically UVC, but just in general, we have done a lot of self-education on the differences in UV lighting and, what we might already have in the building versus how we can add to that or improve what we have. And then also, at a main cost effective.
I think you all raised an interesting and different response to that. And that, Linda, what I heard from you is your building is obviously being older, may not have been capable of handling some of the changes. And so trying a staged approach where you're combining strategies is, worked best for you. And Carrie, in your building, it was in a position where it could very easily have those, strategies deployed without much enhancement. And Jess, what I heard from you was that, hey, let's let's think about what we're doing and evaluate the technologies. It's new, and there is not a ton of research yet done on it. And then back to Linda, what you said was that let's really understand the differences in what we're evaluating. And so I think those are all very, very good points. And basically, it sounds like what it comes down to is what can your building handle and what's going to be the best strategy for your building in particular. So really love that topic, and those answers. Those are great. Another question, and I'm kind of paraphrasing this one because I'm interested in broadening it a little bit, but just curious to know how ownership and their either sustainability consultants or internal sustainability folks are guiding and supporting you in these processes, specifically the sustainability teams. They have a very unique focus, but what would you say their role has been in guiding your decision making in this process and during the course of this last year?
I'll say, I think their role has been, to be a support and a resource. If they may potentially have the capability of having more detailed information, more national networks that I may not be privy to, or locally we're not privy to. So I think that in the general, in the global view of it, they are able to provide a broader perspective than sometimes locally you can, and you have to take that information, and tailor it to your individual properties, we've all said. But I think being a great resource and having additional resources and kind of national arms, I kind of think of like an octopus, they can kind of reach out and go touch networks that you might not personally have available. That's the best part for me.
Yeah, I would, for our sustainability partners and ownerships partners, a lot of it is aggregating data to report up to ownership. So it's taking information from Energy Star, information that we provide through our certifications and paperwork and documentation that we provide. Just for general reporting, here's where they stand. So as far as driving initiatives, that's typically, obviously our ownership does have specific initiatives they're focused on. It's one of the reasons we're submitting for Fitwell at this point in time, is getting that certification. But the overall, sitting down and analyzing the data and determining what the right protocols and programs are for our property is happening at the property level. And I know I'm saying Bracklet a lot, but candidly, through the information we're calling from Bracklet, it's, hey, here's where our weaknesses and gaps are. Our sustainability partners are super helpful in a lot of other areas, but when it comes to really drilling down, if I create, here's what I think is a question or a topic or an issue, and I take it to them, then, there's a lot of interaction, but the proactive identifying where the areas of opportunity are is more incumbent in my role with my engineers and my ownership. So.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with both of them. It's just, really knowing your property and what you can do, because, I think ownership has a tendency to look at things at, asset levels and across, and maybe make, comparisons that aren't actual or aren't good comparisons for buildings in Houston and buildings in Atlanta, and what's going on, well, this building's saving this money, and why, and being able to really look at it at a building level is important, and knowing, because it makes a difference in what that tenancy is and what that building's doing, makes a big difference in the kind of information that you're going to get.
Yeah, I think that it's a really important point to think about, is that, the term benchmarking gets thrown around a lot, but what are you benchmarking against? Is it last year's performance at your building? Are you talking about your neighbor's building, or some building that's not even remotely close to you in terms of size and vintage and shape? And so I think having a subset of buildings that are more comparable is going to help make better decisions. And if a building takes on an optimization and it works well there, will it necessarily work in a building of similar size and shape that's in the same location? Perhaps. And I think having better subsets of those buildings to benchmark against is really important for building owners, not just looking at their whole portfolio around the country and saying, well, it worked up in New York, well, let's try it in Florida and see what kind of results we get. It's kind of throwing darts at that point. We've got a couple of minutes left, and I just want to, we touched on this a little bit. I'd like to maybe get a little bit more specific and try to address this audience question, but how do you see sustainability and ESG reporting impacting your tenants over the next couple of years? And I think just to add on to that, as we hopefully emerge from COVID times and get back to business as usual, but also in the interim between now and then.
How to repeat the question? Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say that I know that for us, it has become a priority initiative for the larger corporations that are reside in our buildings. And so, smaller mom and pops can make more personal decisions, but the larger corporations, this is a corporate-wide initiative, and sometimes, global, depending upon the size of the company. So I think it's going to be very important. I think that the building or your property's ability to amenitize, to look at the how you can also help them improve their own involvement and customize their plan for the particular location that you're in, I think becomes very beneficial. I think that it's going to, I think that you'll be able to, not only retain leases, but bring in new leases depending upon, if you're Fitwel certified, or if you, kind of on the same level of LEED Gold or Silver, or, there's going to be corporate initiatives that are going to require, like just certain certifications and abilities and capabilities. So looking at your property and getting creative with your ability to meet those ESG sustainability requirements and goals, I think is going to be really important.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I think Linda hit the nail on the head. The social responsibility of big corporations is really massive right now. I think Coca-Cola and Amazon both have goals to be zero waste by whatever year that they want to be zero waste, and I think it's going to be more important to tenants moving forward, more so than it is already right now, to be able to bring these ESG initiatives to your building and show them what you do and what you're willing to do and how you can accomplish that.
Mm-hmm. I would agree, and it goes back to what we were saying at the beginning. It's just that tenant communication and outreach, because things that, there's not going to be a normal anymore. It is, what is the new normal, and how are we adjusting to that, and listening to our tenant base for what the needs are for their work environment now. We're fortunate. We actually are having more leasing activity at this point in time. There was a concern that, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? But we're already getting renewals 3 years pre-term, just to extend and move on. So what are those needs in listening? Whether it's adding additional scooter parking, biking, how do you want people to be able to eat? What does that look like in your building? I think there's just a lot of that flow. Tenant events are probably forever changed. So being creative with things as simple as that, it's really going to be sitting back and listening. And I'm sure depending on how the tenants have done within their respective businesses, what does OpEx look like moving forward? So where do we need to cut back? What is and is not important to keep those costs down while still providing a level of service that they're accustomed to at your property? So again, creativity is king, and communication is going to be king with your tenants, because each building is going to be different and each ownership entity is different on their expectations.
Yeah, wow. Some really, really great points. I can't believe it, but we're at the top of the hour. On behalf of the Bracklet team, I want to thank our panelists. It's been an amazing discussion. Really grateful for your participation, and for all of those of you who logged in. It's been a spirited conversation. Thank you for your questions. Apologies if we didn't get to yours, but thanks for attending. If you'd like more information or to connect with us, you can reach us at info@bracklet.com. Again, heartfelt thanks to our veterans who served. Hope you all have a great rest of the week. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
It was great being here.
See you.